So, Ruxandra, you have your 5 minutes, so please start the ball rolling on the issues around balancing public health and commercial confidentiality.
First, thank you for inviting me to take part in this panel. And I think that for us, the right word is balancing. We do, on one side, have to increase the transparency of clinical trial data versus the public needs, and obviously being in the DG of Research and Innovation, the use of that data to generate new knowledge and to bring faster, better treatments to patients in the shortest period possible. On the other side, as in all our programs, we do emphasize the issue of competitiveness, of growth, of jobs, protection of intellectual property, and how all this can be set into the global context and in the trade context. So it isn't a one-size-fits-all. We really have to look at this balancing act and find the right solution. I think that both from our programs and from our initiatives, our partnerships with both the member states and in the context of Innovative Medicine Initiative with the pharmaceutical industry, we are experimenting of how this sharing can be balanced and done to the benefit of pushing forward science, of bringing new tools, new technologies, new developments faster to the patients. I would also like to congratulate Alastair for the piece that is included in this pamphlet. In fact, these ideas are very much on what we have tried to foster in our international consortia, for instance, in the context of rare diseases or personalized medicine, where we do encourage the investigators to share their data, whatever the data might be. And as in the previous panel, we do agree that the devil is in details and that we have to work together, the various stakeholders, to find those details that would in fact foster the development of science and bring these new diagnostic of therapies to the patients faster while not compromising important information.
Thank you very much indeed. Anybody got any quick questions for clarification? Anything that was said that you're not clear about? No? Good. Good. In that case, we will move straight on to Johanna. Yeah.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to start with IP is not the problem. I don't know. I think Ben has actually done a runner. But I think that it's very flattering always to be put at the center of every social and political chaos that has emerged of late. But in fact, IP is not the problem here. And I think it's become a bit of a straw man. I think it's very important to differentiate between data protection, which is governing relationships, and data exclusivity, which does not prevent access to the data. It just prevents what you then do with it commercially. And also, if you're publishing clinical trials data, by the time you started these, you've filed a patent, so you have a priority date. So I can't see many circumstances in which you'd be publishing or providing that data to someone who might be free to use before that priority date. So I think it's absolutely, and I rarely say something is absolutely wrong, but I think in this case it's absolutely wrong to say that IP is the problem, and I wish Ben were here to hear that. So I rarely get to say that. And when I was looking at some of these issues, I agree that with the first panel, the three key concerns of privacy, regulation, and investment, and I think that the way these have interrelated have emerged quite clearly in both the preceding panels. I think that it's important also, despite what was raised in discussion, it isn't just an IT problem. And technology doesn't answer everything. and technology isn't there to enforce the law or to enforce social relationships or cultural relationships or relationships to knowledge or whatever. I think it's certainly a business culture that really, I think to a large extent we might be speaking about. And so I think it's the balance by what, between whom and so forth is a really important question. But I think in many respects we're balancing different things. The other thing I also think that is important that has emerged in earlier, Nicola mentioned the biobanks and the way to get patient participation and trust in that. That's actually, I think, one of the key values that perhaps is coming out in the earlier discussions, how you get that trust. And I was intrigued by the IBM's Watson because it made me think of Deleuze and Guattari, and I was thinking of patients and their machinic enslavement to Watson. I would like to see a doctor occasionally, and I think but I mean it's also an important part of what we're talking about, which is relationships to knowledge and relationships in that diagnostic process. So it's a brilliant resource. But I mean, in terms of what we're talking about, it's really that relationship with the patient and that iterative and communicative and meaningful relationships in dialogue with each other. So that would be how I would like to see how that's used. But I mean, one of my concerns is when we talk about the increasing precision and calculability of health in the same way we talk about other problems, and other speaking specifically from law, increasingly subjugating law to an economics problem and the calculability of law. And I think that what we might learn from problems of policy making in law would actually be quite relevant here. And so, are we always using the right evidence? Are we starting with the right propositions and things like that? Are we just proving what we already think and so forth? So in terms of the broader right to health, I think that accessibility and also the acceptability really foregrounds that relationship to the patient. And certainly in this specific question of clinical trials data, that's really quite important. And don't worry, this is all just...
You've got another minute,
yeah,
so there's plenty of time to work your way through.
Thank you. So I really, I really wanted to draw out some of those key points from the earlier panels, and I think so. If we are looking at this concern with our relationship to information, perhaps in the way that you might consider the relationship with intellectual property is the way that we use information and access to information as an incentive. So, for instance, the way data exclusivity periods are used as incentives to work in particular areas of medicine, or in other forms where, like priority review vouchers and other types of mechanisms where you bank innovation in one area to use in a more profitable area. It's all about these relationships to information, and so that highlights how we deal with this. So I would argue that intellectual property, again, isn't the problem, but its fundamental value is actually to provide an incentive to share what you're doing. That's what I think we're looking at different subject matter. So when you're looking at the invention itself, you're looking at who can manufacture it, who can produce it, who can work with it, and so forth. And on the other hand, when we're talking about here, we're talking about public health and a relationship to information. So whether that information, that relationship is commercial or is it private, and so forth. So it's really crucial, I think, to get those issues distinct. And so finally, I think what we have really is this question of the value at stake is use, so use of that data, how people use that data, and the risk is that it is not used to an extent. And perhaps that is part of the incentive to take that forward. I don't see that it is a question of having to reform intellectual property law, because I really don't know what that would change, unless you're introducing completely new rights and new relationships or new exclusions and so forth. And so I think the key things that have come out in the previous two panels are, when you're looking at engaging the public's participation, is this question of their kind of co-ownership, but in a popular sense, not in a legal sense, a sort of a sense of being part of that starting point. So then you generate that interest in the research going forward, that sense of doing something with everybody else. And that's very much behind all of the momentum behind biobanks, and also in other areas where you're dealing with quite specific concerns, with a population. So malaria gen, for instance, how do you get people to trust what is going on to give their information? So yeah, that's
great. Thank you very much indeed, Johanna. Any questions for clarification there? Yes, one very quick one.
Well, my question is more that I'd like to hear a reflection of Richard Bergstrom of Abbvie on the fact that if intellectual property is not the problem, what Abbvie will want to do when they are reflecting on the EMA issue.
I think we'll probably leave that for the discussion, because I think other speakers may want to have a view on some of those things, but I would come back to you and Richard to give a chance for that when we get to the discussion. But let's now move on to Neal, who is going to give us his 5 minutes with benefit of slides. So,
one slide. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank you also for inviting me here today. This is actually my first time in Brussels. I'm enjoying myself very, very much. So, thank you.
It'll wear off very quickly.
Interests of public health and commercial confidentiality can be reconciled. Companies like mine protect their business assets in order to maintain their ability to discover and treat new diseases and help patients. And we believe strongly that this is itself a public health interest that has to be protected for the good of us all. Balance, someone else said it, but I agree, suggests compromise. And the extreme positions on transparency, disclose everything to everyone or disclose nothing, are both untenable. And they are both not in the public health interest. Current law and practice results in the release of extensive amounts of information in the marketing dossiers that we submit to regulators. I do have one slide, but it's only one slide. It does build. Here is a list, this graphic, of everything in our applications that is made public right now. Now, this is a busy slide, but it's supposed to be, because there's a lot of information here, including safety and efficacy approval documents that come straight out of our dossiers, and safety reports and assessments. And our scientists also voluntarily present results and data at conferences, and we publish the results in journals and so forth. And this means that there's a vast amount of information that gets released to both physicians and patients right off the bat without any controversy whatsoever. Now, how we approach deciding how to release what's left over is the central question, and it's very much a company-specific product-by-product analysis. Each company must be permitted on its own to determine what information in which of its dossiers for which of its products it needs to protect in order to prevent competitive harm. Now, this is how we at Abbvie try to approach such disclosure issues. Here in yellow, works wonderful, are certain categories of information which are present in marketing authorization dossiers that may, depending on the circumstances, constitute confidential commercial information, what we call CCI. There's a very, very good detailed, much more detailed description of this yellow information in the Joint Pharma FPA principles. But briefly, subject level data, is information on individual study subjects, like demographic data, lab results, adverse events. Study level data consist of the subject level data organized into data sets to be used in interpreting the outcome of a study. Now, the information in yellow may be considered confidential because it can be used by other companies to get competing products approved more quickly. And that makes the information commercially valuable to us. Now, with this yellow information, we recognize, however, that access to it can be central to advancing public health. So Abbvie is committed to giving others in the scientific community reasonable access to this information in order to replicate results, prove or disprove what's in the package insert right now, prove or disprove what we've tried to say is accurate before, generate new ideas, and basically to move science forward. This is the fundamental way that science advances, and Abbvie is 100% behind it and in favor of advancing science for patients. But there have to be reasonable controls put on the release of this information in order to maintain the appropriate balance, the center position that we're talking about. Information released without prohibitions on subsequent release to companies who want to exploit the information for their own commercial advantage undermines the public interest in release of the information in the first place. Now, here in white, there's a third category of information I want to talk about. We may consider this CCI depending on the circumstances also. Interpretive analyses, judgments, these include a sponsor's characterization, theories, and conclusions regarding subject level and study level results. It also includes our individual, internal, tactical decisions on how we're going to run a study. How are we going to engage with the regulators? How we are going to confront and solve problems and challenges that we've uncovered during our clinical studies. A good way to think about this white information is that it's subjective compared to the yellow, which is more objective. It's more information of a factual in nature. The white represents the intellectual output of our scientists, which we consider among our company's most valuable assets. And the only way to protect this information is to protect it from disclosure as CCI. This information can't be patented, and it's not entitled to non-patent regulatory exclusivity. This sort of information can give other companies a tremendous competitive advantage by revealing our subjective strategic thinking for proving the safety and efficacy of our products. And significantly, third-party researchers do not need access to this sort of information to conduct robust, independent analyses of our data and our products. So Abbvie's message for the panel to consider today is that the biopharmaceutical industry is committed to the scientific process and all that it entails, including responsible data sharing to both replicate or challenge what's been done before or to spark new research and advance science. We believe in a balanced approach to categorizing and releasing information in our dossiers that's not already made public. So the objective study data and information needed by scientists, what I will simplify as the yellow stuff, should be released, accompanied by appropriate conditions and safeguards. This balanced approach, Abbvie suggests, serves the public interest, both by releasing information for responsible use by the scientific community and also preserving the incentives that my industry needs to keep researching, developing, and getting approved new products that cure disease and help us all.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Any questions or now clarification? Yes. Please remind us who you are.
Yes,
Yes.
when you talk about this, the yellow section, and we take a clinical study report, if you talk about interpretive analysis and results, do you refer to the discussion and conclusion? And if this is what it is meant, doesn't that enter into your labeling? Because if I look at what typically we write in a clinical study report, conclusions and discussion generally reflects in the label. So I was wondering what you are driving at here.
This is the right approach. I mean, it's not constructive to look at categories of documents and say, we're going to release this. We'll release Annex 1, 7, and 8, and a clinical study report. Now, because all three categories of information are interspersed throughout all of these documents. And it takes a very, very fine analysis, which it's on the burden, by the way, of the company to do, to identify what's sensitive. And you are right. A lot of summary information in the label, which is the product of all of our work, is in the blue stuff. It's in the label. It's in the EPARs. It's in the summaries that FDA releases. It's all out there. It's enough to give independent researchers, the end product of our conclusions. But the detail of the give and take of the problem solving, which is reflected in the narratives of some of these clinical study reports, is internal sensitive information which is nowhere reflected in the label. The process of getting these products approved with the regulatory agencies is a give and take of issues, challenges, reworking of data in response to regulators' concerns or concerns that we have identified and raised ourselves, which needs to be explained and articulated in documents that we submit to regulators to get products approved. And if I'm a competitor to Abbvie, and I'm in a competitive landscape where there are a lot of products on the market, and I want to enter that market, the first thing I want is Abbvie's clinical study report, because I want to know what problems I am going to have to confront when I try and get a product approved. And that is a competitive advantage. And that's why we consider this information, depending on the circumstances, CCI.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll move on.
Can I have just one question, two maybe?
Is it a question of fact?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Did I understand it correctly, that when you were talking about the yellow stuff, that you were mentioning adverse events? I'm
Sure,
almost sure. Of course,
Absolutely.
of
That's
course.
objective data.
You think that adverse events might be commercially confidential information?
Well, it is commercially confidential information because if adverse events are reflected in either patient-level data or in study-level data, that information can be, in one instance, photocopied and taken to, I heard a country, I'm just going to use this as the example that was raised before, Bangladesh. I can photocopy that data, including the adverse events, and perhaps do a bioequivalence study, and I can get a product on the market. That steals my company's data and
The question
information.
is yes.
The
You
question
say
is
yes.
Absolutely yes.
Adverse events might be commercially confidential.
Yes, but it's very important to understand that does not mean that it can't be released.
And you are aware that you're working in the healthcare industry
It's very important to
with
understand.
patients and human beings.
This is descending into discussion points, and we'll come back to that. But yeah, Hans-Georg, did you have is this a question or a response to?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I've been a regulator for many years in this, but I'm totally flabbergasted. What exactly is in that white field? If we ask your company, give an explanation here, we think there is a signal for carcinogenicity or whatever, and there is a healthcare concern, a public health concern, and then you respond to that. Is that what you mean in the white circle?
There are internal, deliberative processes, thoughts, product of our scientists that are used to frame data, present data, organize data, and argue or present that data to the regulators in a fashion that we believe supports the safety and effectiveness of our products. That information, including adverse events, to respond to the previous question, is confidential commercial information because if released, other companies could use it to help them get products approved. Now again, and I want to make sure I'm crystal clear on this, that does not mean that we believe the public interest does not outweigh release of that information. In fact, for all the yellow information, we think it should be released. We think that the public interest, if it's released under the appropriate conditions, the main condition being, I promise not to share it with your competitors, then that information can be released.
Okay, fine. I'm anxious that we give Jacqueline the fair crack of the whip and don't move into the discussion too quickly. So Jacqueline, your 5 minutes starts now.
Okay, I think I'll be very brief. I had to think long and hard before coming to sit on the panel today because I realised that a number of the different interests are also included in the membership of EPPOSI, which is equally weighted patient science industry. So what I'm about to say, I think will just state the elephant in the room, which I think we've all been avoiding for the day. And I'll start off by saying that, as my colleague Johanna mentioned, IP is not the problem. I think trust is the problem. I think that's a major challenge that we've all sat here discussing today. It's not just trust, it's risk, as I think was mentioned at the beginning of the day. Risk in terms of competitive risk, in terms of patient safety risk, in terms of dominating the market risk. I want us to go back to basics when we have the follow-up discussion in terms of the EMA, HMA definition of commercial confidentiality, which again hasn't actually been given today. We've talked around the subject, but when you go back to those basics, you'll see that the EMA draft policy document and the FPA document are actually reasonably aligned. There is some negotiation, but again, that will boil down to trust. So I make the, I quote, commercial confidential information shall mean any information which is not in the public domain or publicly available, and where disclosure may undermine the economic interest or competitive position of the owner of information. Now, as I stated, all of EPPOSI's work, we look for pragmatic win-win-win solutions for patient science industry. Clearly, if we were to go with this definition, there would be a dichotomy between commercial confidentiality and public health considerations within a multi-stakeholder environment. Now, if you look more closely at the FPA documentation, essentially, it's a form of self-regulation. Nobody stated that fact today. We hummed around it. We didn't actually say self-regulation, possibly because of the connotations. Those connotations being that when a particular stakeholder group decides that they're going to self-regulate, who regulates them? There are elements within the document which, and I know it's been discussed earlier on today as well, in relation to inclusiveness when we have to the external scientific committees or scientific review board. The fact is that it's, at best, it can't be called fully inclusive in terms of the governance structures. Certainly from an EPPOSI perspective, we would highly recommend, as I know was EPF recommended earlier on today, that patients and families be included as part of any process in terms of deciding with whom to share data and how to share that data. The big question for us centers around should commercially confidential data as perceived by industry, so let's say it as it is, trade secrets, even be considered as such for the purposes of clinical trials results. As a multi-stakeholder think tank, it's not within my remit to come down on one side or the other. I understand this. I have many members in the room. I'm never going to give my personal opinion. However, EPPOSI is going through a reflection process to explore what to consider when sharing data rather than how to do it, because we consider that this is a far more constructive way of proceeding. I would be interested to know, therefore, as I hand back over to Alastair, from panelists as well as those of you in the audience, your thoughts on topics such as quality assurance by peer review of originators, analysts and stakeholders of data, predefined research questions and analyses plans, all of which have been alluded to during the course of today, informed patients and informed consent, and should this actually be only at EMA level? Should we be looking at national databases as well when we talk about big data and data sharing? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right. So, it's open. We've heard that IP is not the problem. I was in Belfast last week waiting at a set of traffic lights in a taxi when a bus went past, and written on the side of the bus it said, "Suicide is not the answer." Well, I suppose it depends what the question is that you're asking. But, you know, in terms of if IP is not the problem, then is it the solution? Or if it's not the problem, what is the answer? I mean, you tried to raise that question with Richard Bergstrom. So Richard, do you want to respond now to that question?
Yes. Well, IP is not a problem. It's never a problem. It's rather the lack of IP which is the problem. And what we're looking at here, if I connect this question with the debate that Neal initiated, is that we're looking here at and when I talk to my members, most of them are quite relaxed about all of this. Because for most products, people have no issues. We're going to put out these CSRs, we'll redact a little bit, there may be something, maybe nothing in there. Some companies are quite relaxed about this because the way they write the documents, the type of products they have. And others have more issues because they may be in a very competitive field, maybe particularly in the biologics field where you do a lot of bridging and you have to argue to get your persuade the regulators to take the totality of the data and approve it. I guess that's what you're after, Neal. So there it becomes a bit more sensitive. You look at the global scope as well. You may have some companies from Korea or China breathing down your neck trying to copy your technology. Then you get a bit extra sensitive about putting things out there. We're trying to build a model here which works for 100% of products. Okay? And for most of them we have good patents and they work and we enforce them and fine, no problem. But maybe for 1/10 of the pipeline, we rely on other incentives. And if I may use an example, Lundbeck, this is in the public domain, recently got a product approved for alcoholism, nalmefene. This is publicly known, the investors know it, that there's no patent on that use. So Lundbeck has developed this only and commercializing it. You can say it's a pity they only would commercialize it in Europe and countries with data protection. All the citizens of the world should get the medicine. Well, we tend to have it here in my home country, but nevertheless, the point being this, that would never have been developed if they didn't know that they had some kind of protection. Now, with the new definitions that are emerging in Europe even, Hans-Georg, we're told that that's a known substance. It's not an new active substance, and therefore it's not subject to data protection, which means that a generic producer can come day one and file an application for approval. It's not, there's no protection, no patent, no data protection, no exclusivity, no market exclusivity. So that, and it's not all products, maybe 1 in 10 or maybe even less, it doesn't matter. But we need a model that works for that, and we need to have a model that works for Neal's product, which is subject to a legal case right now that FPA is supporting, where it's extremely competitive in the biologic space with new indications and everyone's trying to learn from one another and so on. So we need to find a model where also these 1 out of 10, there is a possibility actually to blacken out a bit more than is the normal case. But again, under these commitments that we've put forward today, this data, all of it, including that white spot there, will be available for the legitimate researchers. So a scientific organization coming in saying that we would like to have this information, provided there are safeguards for patient privacy and commercial confidential information, we're willing to share the information. Whole CSRs, all the arguments, all the arguments we put forward to the regulators. But it's just that we don't want it out there for everyone.
Thank you. Ruxandra, we heard you say that there is no one-size-fits-all model. Then Neal said that decisions need to be made on a company-by-company, product-by-product basis. But somewhere between one-size-fits-all and product-by-product frameworks is a balance, because you can't have one-on-one cases, because that makes public understanding, patient understanding, academic understanding just too much a matter of chance. How are you going to balance that sort of, the case that that Neal's made very eloquently for commercial judgment to be the overriding determinant of what gets put in the public domain and what's not, and the public health need to know?
I think that we've heard both Neal and Richard, and we've heard that there is actually a solution for the vast majority of the clinical trials. Obviously that we will have to work on some of the details on how to do it. For instance, what are the categories of clinical trials, what data is going to be released for each of those trials. Obviously, we have heard, Richard, that we will have to work with the multiple stakeholders, with the patients, with the companies, to find this right balance. So I don't think that is the question. And within the initiatives that we are developing, a large part of the new projects are targeting exactly that part of regulatory sciences where we have the opportunity to fund academic investigators investigators, small enterprises, large industries coming with their own funding in the context of Innovative Medicine Initiative and putting forward regulatory questions. And to take the example of the intellectual property, my personal belief is that indeed the intellectual property is not a problem, but the quality of an intellectual property agreement might transform a project in a success or in a failure. Also, we were talking about how things are protected, and I'm not talking exclusively about intellectual property. Obviously, the value of those documents and what is released and what is kept confidential is what would make the difference. And I think that what we are trying to foster through the Innovative Medicine Initiative and through our international consortia is this work where the stakeholders can come together, address one by one these issues, have very systematic working groups where each of these elements is looked at from the various points of view, and then a solution that fits the multiple stakeholders is put forward.
And would you expect, I mean, we talked about commercial confidentiality, what about academic confidentiality? Do you expect the same standards of disclosure, the same expectations of transparency to be required wherever the sector, wherever this new knowledge is generated, or is there a different code of conduct for people in academia?
No, absolutely. We have to have very similar, if not identical rules. It's not because a clinical trial is performed by an academic investigator or by a small industry, by a large industry that you have. Of course, the means are different. And maybe the type of the clinical trial, coming to my first point, that we will need to have a clear definition of what is released in what type of clinical trial. There you have a question. I wouldn't differentiate it on who's the sponsor, but obviously if we are looking at the clinical trial for a new indication for something that has been on the market for 50 years, that type of trial is very different from a new biologics or a completely new a molecule that has a very new mechanism of action, and so on and so forth. And I will take this opportunity to come back to our Innovative Medicine Initiative projects, not only on the regulator side, but also of the fact that those projects are shifting the questions. We do have efficacy and safety projects, whereas many big companies, and I'm talking 8, 10, 12 big companies, academic investigators and small or medium enterprises decide to put together all their data coming from clinical trials and to analyze it in a very rigorous scientific manner all together. Fantastic results are coming from those projects. Really a leap of science. But for that, you need actually to have the entire community on board and actually determine from the get-go the rules of the game.
Which brings up the point that you made about co-ownership and building trust through.
Well, I was thinking that there's cases in IP where patients have had tissue collected and they have been confused as to why that tissue could subsequently be commercialized researched upon and then commercialized in an invention. And although they can't recover in IP, of course, there are other relationships between the doctor and the patient in those circumstances. But what it did bring about was an interest in this idea of a kind of a sharing in the starting point of the invention and the inventive process. So sort of the basic starting materials coming from the patient. And I think it's a similar relationship that donors or participants or what have you have to biobanks, and also probably in this case as well, how patients feel about their participation in a trial being used subsequently on research that might be unrelated. I mean, I've seen where people have raised this as a potential issue about the patient's autonomy with respect to their participation in the first trial. And notwithstanding any issues about whether or not their information is adequately protected and so on, just the fact that they mightn't agree with the subsequent research, and so they feel a little bit left out of the decision-making process. So I think that most certainly that question of autonomy and a certain sense of agency regarding that decision to take part in clinical trials and how that information is subsequently used is a careful relationship to manage and preserve.
Thank you. Jim.
Jim Murray, two very quick questions. Okay.
Can you wait for the microphone, please?
Thanks very much, Jim Murray, Open Medicine EU. Two quick questions for Mr. Parker. The first one is very short. Disclosure to certain recognised scientists is envisaged, but they can't share this data normally with somebody else. Does that mean they can't share it with clinicians? First question. Second question, the EMA, in the policy they're following, are following an independent assessment by the European Ombudsman, who set out a series of criteria, which does recognise, by the way, the possibility that some information may be commercially confidential and may properly be withheld from any disclosure the agency might make. The real question, though, is you seem to say we won't accept anybody else's judgment. It is only the company's judgment which matters, not that of the Ombudsman, not that of the EMA, not that of anyone else. And it seems also, if I'm not mistaken, that that principle very much underlies the FPA roadmap.
Let me comment on the second question. So the general idea of confidential commercial information, there's a worldwide definition, and there more or less is one. It was repeated earlier by my co-panelist here. I mean, confidential commercial information is information that a company keeps internal, protects, because if it were to release it, it would give a competitive advantage to another company. That, by its nature, is a subjective decision. So you are correct that in the first instance, that decision is up to the company. The company is best positioned to know the competitive environment within it operates. Now, I believe that that judgment deserves some respect. Now, it can be rebutted. Okay, it can be rebutted by a factual assertion that you say is confidential, but you released it in a report or in a poster at a symposium last year. So, or it can be rebutted by going and getting experts to talk about the competitive environment which in which the product exists. But absolutely, I mean, the judgment is the company's, because that's what the definition of CCI goes to. The subjective belief of the value by a company of its information.
And who arbitrates between you and the rebutter?
Ultimately, a judge does. But there should be a process where a request comes into a regulator for a clinical study report. Clinical study report is given to a company, and Abbvie will treat it according to these circles, perhaps depending on can we release it with controls. But Abbvie, we will go through, and the first thing we will do is we will circle everything in that clinical study report that we know is already out in the public domain. All the adverse events that are reported in PSURs. All of that information, which is already in the blue, just goes. It's not even in dispute. And then we will look at information that is not in the public, and we will assess whether, under the circumstances, releasing this publicly without any conditions is going to hurt us competitively. We should be able to go back to the regulator and present that version of the document. The regulator, in its expertise, or the ombudsman, or any other objective or third party who has the legal authority, should be able to challenge that. And if an agreement, a compromise, a settlement can't be reached, then ultimately we live in a world where there are courts. And sometimes you have to go to courts. We believe that those instances, if we can implement a responsible compromise along the lines of the joint principles and what I've talked about here, should be very few and very far between.
Sorry, you see, I can't go to court against
microphone.
You. Sorry. I don't mean me personally. I'm sorry. I hope my argument is not similarly back to front. the difficulty about challenging it in court is one must have standing and a set of principles, independent principles by which they will be judged, by which the court will arbitrate. And where are they to come from?
Well, there is a law right now which gives you standing immediately. The transparency reg allows any member, any person of the public, to submit a request to the EMA for data and for information. And if ultimately the EMA denies that because they have been provided a redacted copy by the company, then you can challenge that decision not to get the data. Now, if the EMA decides, I'm going to give you the data, and I am going to disregard the company's explanations about what's confidential, then the company has to sue the regulator. And that happens sometimes too.
And Jim's first question about sharing with medics.
I'm sorry, I don't remember your first question, Jim.
Scientists who get the results onto the roadmap or
Right.
recognized scientists, they can't share it normally with other people. Can they share it with clinicians?
Well, there are two issues going on here. Number one, as a matter of law, if I have confidential information and I decide to give it to you, and I don't make any sort of accommodation or agreement which says you won't give it to your neighbor, then I've lost the ability to protect it as CCI. Because the test, as I said, is something that a company protects. So we need, when we release it, to ensure that Scientist A is not going to be a conduit of my CCI to Journalist B.
Flaminia, you want to
Yes.
say who you are, please?
So Flaminia Macchia, I'm a European Public Affairs at Eurordis, which is the European...
Yep.
Oh, I'm
behind
sorry.
the pink chair.
Okay.
Since the beginning.
Yes.
So the European Organization for Rare Diseases, I'm really trying to understand what you're saying. You know, it's difficult, but can you give an example of an adverse event that would be commercially confidential? So commercially confidential not to have to be shared with the patients, but maybe this is commercially confidential.
Let me answer your question, because it was raised before. I cannot come up with an example of an adverse event that we would not share, because Abbvie is going to share all of its yellow stuff under appropriate conditions that maintain the public health. Now, stepping back from this, and I will talk to my regulatory people, but if there is adverse event information which is not released in PSURs, which is not released normally and made available in adverse event errors databases worldwide, if there is discussion of adverse events perhaps in the narrative of clinical studies, which doesn't fall into any of those categories, I guess I would suspect it would fall into the yellow, and it would be released, you know, under the conditions that we would be sure would ensure advancement of the public health. But also, remember, in the blue, I think it's in the bottom right of my graphic, companies can choose to release anything that they want to. That's part of the definition of CCI. Personally, from Abbvie's perspective, I can't imagine any circumstance where my company would not release voluntarily adverse event information that was relevant to one of our products on the market. That's just not the way we do business.
But this has happened in the past, in the history, no?
I can only speak for Abbvie here.
Yeah, okay.
You know, so I don't know what you're talking, you know, the specific examples. But again, this idea, this construct that we're putting together here, you know, it is a big picture of trying to ensure that we recognize the different kinds of information that appear all throughout these marketing authorization dossiers. A lot of stuff can be released. A lot of stuff is confidential commercial information, but a lot of that CCI, notwithstanding that it's confidential and can help competitors, we can release it provided that the proper conditions are met.
Okay, now time is running on. I'm going to take one here. There's a gentleman over there in a orange tie who I think it's orange. You'll probably tell me it's and then a gentleman over here, and I think that's likely to be all. So please keep your questions or comments brief. Gentleman at the back there, you had your hand up? That was you? No, you weren't indicating a wish to speak. You were just waving your arms around. Fine. Okay, good. In that case, we'll come back.
I will promise to keep my answers brief.
We will come back over here. Yeah.
It's just a small. I heard you say that the company is the best judgment of its environment in which it is operating.
Competitive environment, yes.
Yeah, but I hope it goes further than only the competitive environment, because you are working in healthcare. And that's just my question. Do you have any idea that you are working in healthcare with patients?
Well, of course. That's our whole reason to be in existence, is to research and discover new patients, new drugs.
What I hear is the only reason that you have is that you have commercial confidential information.
Our reason for being in business is to continue to research and discover new products to help patients and all of us. Okay. The question and the considerations of commercial value, our commercial environment, when we consider whether something is CCI, has to center on the commercial value of that information in our marketing authorization dossier to our competitors, because that's what the definition of CCI is. That is separate from the determination of whether it's publicly releasable in the public interest.
Okay, can we take this?
Yeah, my name is Justin McCarthy. I'm with Pfizer. I just wanted to loop back to the comment the question the gentleman on the table asked about if we shared data with him as a researcher and he developed a new finding, could he share that with physicians and clinicians? And I actually would think the answer would be absolutely yes. The restrictions on controlled use go to the underlying patient-level data. If someone analyzes that and finds a new safety issue or an issue, we not only would allow it, I think we would encourage it, and I think we actually say that. We actually want those results to be published. We may not want the actual patient-level data to be passed on, because that needs to be controlled and there are consent issues and privacy issues, but if there's a new finding, I would think we would encourage it, actually, and I think you should share it with clinicians and others.
I absolutely agree with Justin. I hope I was clear on that point. It is the underlying data which will lose its legal protection if it's passed on. But the conclusions and work product of the subsequent researcher, that's how science advances. That's why we're putting out the information in the first place.
Right. Okay, I'm afraid we're running to an end, and I did say that we would stop promptly. It seems to me that one of the issues that has been underpinning a lot of what we've said in this session is the whole question of trust, or the lack of trust, depending on which side of the coin you look at. And trust is clearly essential. If trust in the framework by which new products are brought to market breaks down, in a sense, it doesn't matter how good or bad they are, they will never get to the point where patients stand to benefit. So in drawing this to a conclusion, I'd just like to ask our panelists to reflect very briefly on what they think would help to build and sustain a climate where there is appropriate trust, not blind trust, but informed trust in the process that allows the proper balance, whatever that might be, between the demands of public health and health of the public and the commercial or other forms of necessary confidentiality in order to allow the wheels of innovation to keep rotating. So we're going to start at this end with you, Jacqueline, because you've been remarkably quiet in this discussion.
Because I was thinking, and I speak here as a lawyer by education, I give a message to Richard and also to Hans Jorg, and also any other patient organisations in the room. Please sit down, lock the lawyers out of the room, and actually negotiate properly the processes that you want to be put in place, so that we don't come back a year from now and this gentleman from Holland has exactly the same message. I think you'll find that there's a lot of commonalities. If you include the stakeholders as part of the discussion, I think you'll make a lot more traction in the shorter period of time.
Thank you. Johanna?
In some respects, I think listening to everything, it occurs to me, I think, just as obviously as a rank outsider who's about to be locked out of the room, that in fact the greater challenge for engaging trust is actually with the commercial entities, because I think to a large degree, socially or politically or whatever, people are becoming more and more reassured by sharing as a form of protection. Not me so much. I'm not even on Facebook, but my dog is. But but almost that wealth of information being a kind of protection. So you almost secure a sense of privacy by having so much available, as it were. You become less interesting, if you like. And I think that there, even just recalling the discussions with UK Biobank when it was in the commencement stages, I think it's quite a different culture, patient culture perhaps, but obviously the patient groups would be more informed on this than I am, that we're dealing with. So in terms of trust, I am always very reluctant to talk about new legislation and new IP rights. But perhaps the really key focus is how we deal with that relationship to information. So it's not about patents. It's about that confidence and that trust to engage.
Thank you. And Neal?
Yeah, well, I hope I get invited back to Brussels and not locked out of the room. I didn't. I'll keep it brief. I think that there are certain sort of all-encompassing sort of total-like statements, like clinical data is not CCI, and the statement, the public interest always outweighs interests of CCI. I view those as real roadblocks to a balanced compromise solution. I think that there is a solution here that recognizes the interests on both sides. I mean, you have to do the balance. Otherwise, if you kind of say the balance in the first instance is not legitimate at all, then you kind of dismiss the interests that are on both sides of the scale.
Thank you. And we'll leave the last word to the Commission, as always. Ruxandra.
Thank you. And I'm going to think at the patients. I think that we will find a solution of what to do to this enormous amount of data that is already released, that is about to be released, if we think that we are those patients that are receiving that medication or are waiting for the medication that needs to be put forward. And then if we have that perspective, we will find the means to find a solution to balance, to have a dialogue, and to develop trust.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank all our panelists. So will you join me in thanking them for a very stimulating and interesting debate?